to be just another family gathering, my father's big retirement dinner. I showed up, even though deep down I knew what was coming. The air already felt stiff when I walked into the dining hall. Everyone was there. Uncles I barely knew. Aunts who never called unless someone died. Cousins flaunting their new cars, careers, kids. All smiles on the outside. Until they looked at me. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I didn't have a flashy job title. I didn't arrive with diamonds around my neck or keys to a luxury SUV. I wore a simple blouse and jeans, hair tied up, barely any makeup. Just me. And from the second I sat down at the far end of the table, I felt it. The judgment. The eyes. The unspoken laughter. Then my father stood up at the head of the table, holding a glass of bourbon. He clinked it with his ring, and the room fell dead quiet. I still remember how he looked, so proud, so smug, like he had built an empire with his bare hands. And maybe he had. But that empire had no room for me. I want to thank my family, he started, with this fake warmth in his voice. Especially my children, Ryan, who just got promoted in the Air Force, and Kayla, who's killing it in real estate. Even Emily bought her second investment property. The room lit up with claps and proud chuckles. Then he paused. And then there's Avery, he said, laughing. I froze. She's still chasing her little painting dreams, he continued, smirking. Working at some underfunded community studio, no savings, no career to speak of. Still renting. No husband. Nothing. 30 years old, and nothing to show. I wish I could say I didn't care. That his words didn't pierce through me like they did. But I felt small, like I was 12 again, being scolded for drawing on the kitchen walls. I felt eyes all around me. My aunt's judgmental grin. My cousin whispering something to her fiancé. Even my own siblings looking away. No one said a word to defend me. I could feel my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I just sat there alone, humiliated, like some unwanted guest at my own family's table. And then the door opened. Heavy footsteps walked in. Everyone turned. It was my husband. He had come straight from a private ceremony, still wearing his uniform, metal ribbon across his chest. He didn't say a word. Just walked to the center of the table, looked my father dead in the eyes, and placed his Medal of Valor right in the center. I came to take my wife home, he said calmly, his voice deep and cold. Silence. You could hear forks hit plates. My father's smirk vanished. My uncle lowered his drink. No one dared say a word. And one by one, they got up and left. Quietly. Embarrassed. Ashamed. That night, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the failure in the family. I felt seen. And it only started there. As we walked out of that house, I didn't look back. Not at the chandelier I used to stare at during boring childhood dinners. Not at the fake smiles. And definitely not at my father. I held my husband's hand tight, my pulse still racing from what had just happened. Once we were in the car, I asked him, "Why did you come?" He didn't even look at me. He just said, "Because you should never have had to sit through that alone." I didn't cry. I wanted to, but not from pain. From release. It was the first time in a long time someone had stood up for me. Not just anyone, my husband, the man they had never taken seriously either. The man they thought was beneath their standards. The one they said looked too quiet, too average. But that quiet man just silenced a room full of people who used to control my every breath. The next day, I got texts. Missed calls. My sister Kayla tried to check in. My aunt messaged, "I think your dad just drank a little too much. He didn't mean it." One even dared to say, "You overreacted." Overreacted? I had sat through years of being the family's favorite target. The one they whispered about when I walked into the kitchen. Still unmarried? Still doing that little art thing? She could have had a real job if she just tried harder. And I used to let it slide. Smile through it. Pretend it didn't bother me. But that night changed something. My husband didn't talk about it again. He just went back to training. He was quiet like always. Strong. Steady. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. And for once, I decided to learn from him. I stopped responding to their messages. I blocked a few of them. I opened a new email, one with my name on it, followed by studio. I rented a small, rundown building downtown. Paint-chipped walls. Broken windows. It smelled like mildew and dust. But it was mine. And it had space. Space for something more than canvases. I painted for hours. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes with music blasting so loud I couldn't even think. People started coming. First 1, then 5, then 10. I didn't ask for anything, just gave them a brush and a space to express. And it turned into something I never expected. They came with pain, grief, loss, anxiety, broken relationships. And in that tiny studio, we healed together. I didn't make money at first, but I made something else impact. One afternoon, I stood by the door, wiping paint off my hands, when I saw my father across the street. He wasn't wearing his suit this time. He looked smaller, older, less ironclad. I didn't wave. He didn't come in. He just stared at the sign on the door, the Haven Studio, and underneath it, in simple handwriting, founded by Avery Kingston. His eyes lingered. Then he turned around and walked away. I didn't chase him. That day, I finally realized I never needed their applause. I just needed to stop waiting for it. After that day, things didn't magically fix themselves. Healing isn't some switch you flip. It's slow, messy, and lonely. But it's real. And that's what I wanted now. Something real. No more pretending. No more squeezing into a version of myself that made my father comfortable. The studio, the Haven, became more than just a place to paint. It became a refuge. For me. For others like me. People who were mocked, overlooked, belittled. Women who'd left controlling marriages. Young men who felt invisible in their own families. Teenagers suffocating in silence. They found their way to that little dusty building like birds limping home. And I listened to every one of them. Not as some therapist. Not as a savior. Just a woman who knew what it felt like to be dismissed. It was a Thursday evening when the door opened, and I heard the voice I thought I'd never hear again. Avery. I didn't need to look up. My body knew before my eyes did. It was Kayla. She walked in wearing a pencil skirt, heels clicking against the old tile floor like she owned the place. But her face? It wasn't smug anymore. It looked tired. Faded. Like she hadn't slept in days. I was just nearby, she said, but we both knew that was a lie. No one ended up on this block by accident. I wiped my hands on my apron, covered in dried cobalt blue and amber orange. I didn't rush to hug her. Didn't smile either. I just nodded, waiting. She looked around. Saw the walls covered in art. Some chaotic, some breathtaking. All of them raw. Then her eyes landed on the corner shelf where my husband's medal rested, framed, quiet, still gleaming like it had something to say. Her throat tightened. Dad's been off lately. I didn't answer. She tried again. He talks about you more than you think. I doubt it, I replied, turning toward my workstation. Unless he's telling people how I wasted my life. She winced. He's sick, Avery. I froze. That's how they always did it, weaponized sympathy. Dragged me back in with a half-truth wrapped in guilt. Like it was my job to fix everything they broke. I'm sorry he said what he said at the dinner, she continued. You didn't deserve that. I turned to face her. You laughed. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I remember, I said, stepping forward. You laughed. Everyone did. And not one of you stood up for me. Not even once. She looked down at the floor, her perfect little purse now clenched in both hands. I was scared, she finally said. Dad controls everything. I narrowed my eyes. He used to. That's when it hit me. She wasn't there out of regret. She was there because things were falling apart. Because the foundation they all stood on, the one built on fear, control, and silent approval, was crumbling. And now she needed a piece of what I had built on my own. Something solid. Honest. Real. I can't fix Dad, she whispered. But maybe I could volunteer here. Help out.
I didn't say yes.
I didn't say no either. Because something in her eyes reminded me of myself, just a few years ago. I gave her a brush. A canvas. Nothing else. She didn't ask for more. That night, I sat alone in the back of the studio, staring at the framed metal. I remembered the way my husband looked when he placed it on the table. The calm in his voice. The way he made everyone in that room feel small without raising his tone. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity. Mine. And suddenly, I knew I wasn't done yet. Because sometimes, standing tall isn't about shouting louder. It's about building something so steady, so unshakably yours, that the ones who once mocked you have no choice but to sit in their silence. And I was just getting started. About 2 weeks after Kayla's unexpected drop-in, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. They didn't leave a voicemail. Then again, 2 hours later, it rang again. Same number. This time, something inside me whispered, "Pick up." "Hello." I answered, cautious. "Mrs. Kingston?" a woman asked. I didn't answer right away. That name still sounded like it belonged to my mother. "I'm calling from West Pine Care," the woman continued gently. "We have your father here." The air left my lungs. "He's been checked in for a cardiac episode. Mild but serious. He asked for you." I don't know how long I stood there staring at the wall after that call. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the studio. Another part whispered go. Not for him, but maybe for me. For closure. So I went. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't even change out of my paint-stained shirt. I just walked into that sterile white hallway with trembling hands, half expecting him to yell at me the second I opened the door. But he didn't. He looked small. Tubes in his arm. Oxygen at his nose. His hands, once massive and commanding, lay still on his lap. "Avery," he said. Just that. No smugness. No sarcasm. Just my name. I didn't sit. I stood right there, arms folded, my body screaming to turn back around. He didn't look me in the eye. "They say I need to start planning things. Legal things. Future things." I didn't respond. "Kayla said you're running some kind of," he struggled, "healing place?" "It's called a studio," I said sharply. "And it's not some kind of healing place. It is one." He flinched at my tone. For once, he wasn't in control. "I don't want us to leave things like they are," he mumbled. "You're still my daughter." "Am I?" I snapped. "Because at that dinner, you made it real clear who counted and who didn't." His eyes finally lifted to mine. "I was wrong." Silence. "You didn't deserve it," he added. "But I was angry that you didn't follow the path, that you didn't try to prove yourself to me. That right there? That was the problem. I never wanted to prove anything to you," I said. "I just wanted to live without being shamed for it. I wanted to be proud of what I loved. But every time I tried to be myself, you stood right in front of me, blocking the light and telling me I wasn't enough." He closed his eyes like the words hurt. And maybe they did. "I have nothing to give you," he whispered. I didn't want his money. Didn't want an apology. Didn't want him to suddenly turn into a father he never was. So I stepped forward, closer than I had in years. "I didn't come here for anything," I said. "I came so I wouldn't carry your silence as a wound for the rest of my life." Then I walked out. And I felt lighter. That night, I went back to the Haven. It was packed, people laughing, crying, painting in total silence. And there was Kayla, sitting in a corner with a brush in her hand, shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear. But she wasn't. She was showing up. Piece by piece. I joined her at the canvas and added one small stroke of yellow next to her dark gray spiral. She looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw my sister. Not the one molded by our father, but the one she was becoming. "I still don't know who I am without his voice in my head," she whispered. I smiled gently. "Then paint until the voice fades." And she did. And so did I. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's in the stroke of a brush. Or the silence between sisters. Or the walk away from a man who once called you nothing, and the decision to become everything without his permission. 6 months later, I was standing on a makeshift stage, microphone in hand, hands trembling, but not from fear. From the weight of what it had taken to get there. The city had reached out after hearing about the Haven. They wanted to highlight it in a local art and wellness initiative, funding, press, recognition, all of it. What had started as a side studio in a broken-down building was now a movement. We were expanding to a second location. They asked me to speak at the opening ceremony.
Me.
Not my father. Not Kayla.
Me.
I was about to walk on stage when I saw the crowd. Rows of people, new students, local journalists, old volunteers, a few city officials, and then in the middle row, two figures that stopped me cold. My parents. Walter Kingston, no longer the booming, unshakable general of the family, now sat quietly, shoulders hunched forward, watching me with eyes I couldn't read. And next to him, my mother, the woman who always stayed silent, who never raised her voice to defend me, who told me to let it go when my father humiliated me. She had aged, too, but something in her face was softer now. Maybe guilt, maybe pride. I didn't know. I didn't care. I stepped forward. The microphone squeaked. A few polite laughs followed. And then I spoke. I used to believe I had to be loud to be heard. I began to scream until the people who ignored me were forced to look up. But sometimes, the loudest kind of transformation is quiet. It happens in the dark, when no one's watching. And one day, the same people who laughed at you show up hoping they still have a seat.
A pause.
A few heads turned toward the middle row. I let it linger. For years, I was called the failure of my family. The one who didn't fit the mold. The one who chose passion over profit. But I've learned something. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that fits their expectations. The room was silent. All you could hear was the hum of the lights above us. I built the Haven not to prove anything, but because I wanted a space where people could show up exactly as they are and still be enough. Applause erupted.
Real. Raw.
And for me, after the ceremony, people came up to hug me, shake my hand, ask questions. 2 students told me I'd changed their lives. A news anchor asked to interview me. Even the city mayor said he'd love to discuss a third location. And then, as the crowd thinned, I saw them again, my parents. They hadn't moved from their seats. I walked toward them slowly, each step deliberate. My mother stood up first. She opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. I don't need the speech, I said calmly. She nodded. I'm proud of you, Avery, she whispered, her voice shaking. I smiled faintly. You could have said that when it mattered. She blinked back tears, but didn't fight me. Then my father stood. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, something I hadn't seen in decades. It was one of my childhood drawings. Laminated. Preserved. Tucked inside his wallet all these years. You drew this when you were 7, he said. I used to look at it when I traveled. Never told anyone. I took it without saying a word. My fingers shook. I didn't know how to love you without trying to change you, he added. I nodded. And I had to unlove the version of you I kept chasing. He looked down, hands stuffed in his pockets. Then quietly he said, If you ever want to talk, I'm here. And for once, I didn't feel a pang of anger or a need for revenge. I just said, I know, and walked away. Because closure doesn't always come with grand apologies. Sometimes it comes when you no longer need them. That evening, my husband wrapped his arm around me as we watched the sun dip behind the city skyline. He didn't say much, he never had to. His presence was always enough. You did it, he said finally. No, I corrected, laying my head on his shoulder. We did. Because when the world turned its back, he placed a medal on the table. Not for honor, not for applause, but to remind them that the woman they called a failure had a man who believed in her long before anyone else did.
And now?
The same